Question is, shall the bill pass? The chair recognizes Representative Miranda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Permission to speak to the bill?
Representative may proceed.
Thank you. I, of course, rise in opposition to House Bill 227. As a concealed carry permit holder myself, it is my firm belief that legislation to do away with the requirement to have a license to carry a gun takes Ohio in the wrong direction, and a dangerous one at that. If enacted, someone with no safety training, or worse, someone with violent intentions to harm themselves or others, can go and purchase and carry a firearm. Mr. Speaker, it's no surprise that I've heard from law enforcement community about the dangerous pieces of this bill and what that would do to our communities. Allowing untrained and unvetted individuals to carry deadly weapons in parks, shopping malls, and other crowded areas is the opposite of what we should be doing here today. To quote my Hamilton County Sheriff, Charmaine Montgomery, in her testimony against this bill, allowing virtually anyone in Ohio to conceal weapons on their person without training or background checks will make Ohio less safe. More than that, it will make the job of law enforcement even more stressful. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, domestic violence advocates have pointed out that by removing the requirement to apply for a concealed carry permit, many domestic abusers will be able to maintain or obtain possession of a deadly weapon, thus posing an immediate danger to everyone in the household, as well as law enforcement, who will be called to that scene. I want to share some data that we should all consider before taking this vote. According to the Ohio Domestic Violence Network, at least 86% of domestic violence fatalities in Ohio are ones perpetrated with a gun. 86%. And at least 10 law enforcement officers in Ohio have been killed by firearms in recent years by simply responding to the scene. Nationwide studies have also shown that states who have weakened their firearm permit requirements have since experienced a 15% increase in violent crimes. I could also stand here all day recounting the tragic news stories of accidental shootings that result in death by someone who doesn't know how to properly handle a firearm. A quick Google search any day of the week will reveal new tragic incidents of this nature. According to nationwide polling, 88% of Americans think that a permit should be required before carrying a concealed gun in public. And Mr. Speaker, if you'll allow me to bloviate like my good colleague from my county, Bill Seitz, 80% of gun owners, non-gun owners, Republicans, Democrats, and independents agree that high safety standards are critical in issuing concealed carry permits. For the same reasons we don't just allow anyone to obtain a driver's license without training, we shouldn't allow permitless carry of military-grade deadly weapons in public. I mean, for God's sake, go take a jiu-jitsu class and learn how to protect yourself in a way that doesn't put others' lives in danger. This is absolutely absurd. This legislation flies in the face of what Ohioans want. Parents and people all across our state have already been dealing with hostile folks at grocery stores, gas stations, schools, and in this very state house, due to the majority party's bellyaching over keeping people safe during this pandemic. Now you want to tell parents and people all across Ohio to be on the lookout for the next crazy Karen or the next crazy Ron at the grocery store carrying a gun without any training or safety protocols in place whatsoever so that they can shoot the grocery store clerk for asking them to put a mask on. Outrageous. And honestly, the talking points against this bill write themselves, as extremists occupy a ton of your seats. I look out across this floor into the eyes of my colleagues, perhaps the more moderate ones or the sensible ones, and ask you to consider putting people over party. We already have the Castle Doctrine. We are now a full fire at will state. We're even an open carry state. What more do you need to satisfy this blatant red herring. We could be focusing on things that actually matter to Ohioans' lives rather than debating a dangerous attempt to arm our citizens without the proper training, thus creating more Kyle Rittenhouse situations to flood our justice systems right here in Ohio. You know, my papaw, God rest his soul, was a Korean War veteran, a POW, and was an honorable man who fought for our country and our freedoms. He owned miniguns, rifles and shotguns mostly, and our favorite pastime was target practice out in the woods or fishing on Lake Cumberland. But I stand here today telling you he would never let me touch his firearms without properly teaching me how to handle them first. And he certainly wouldn't support legislation like this because he and most veterans understand that you are putting people's lives in danger. Speaking of veterans, as we just recognized Veterans Day last week, it is worth mentioning a 2019 Department of Defense study that found that 68% of suicide deaths among veterans involved a firearm. In other words, veterans make up about 7% of our adult population, yet they account for 18% of the nation's gun suicide deaths. This problem will only be exacerbated if we ease access to deadly weapons for those seeking to commit harm. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, my last point today is simply this. If supporting law enforcement and keeping our communities safe is a priority of yours, which is what you said in the 2020 elections, remember that? The FOP does not support this bill. House Bill 227 needs to be rejected. We need to allow law enforcement and the courts to be able to exercise judgment when there is evidence that someone lacks safety training or has violent intentions. Mr. Speaker, I urge a no vote on House Bill 227, and I call upon my colleagues to instead tune into one of our Gun Violence Prevention Caucus meetings so that you can challenge yourself and learn how to work to enact policies that prevent senseless gun violence in our community, which saves the lives of children, saves the lives of veterans, and saves the lives of officers in the line of duty, instead of making our state a more increasingly dangerous place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.